Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down the X-Files. Huge thank you for joining me again as we search for the truth, and in this video we'll be going through every episode in the second season. Releasing on September 16th, 1994, this is officially the series' longest season. I feel like this is really the season where it went from a cult hit to a cultural phenomenon, and it can't be overstated how important this season was. Clocking in at 25 episodes, it aired almost exactly a year to the date of season 1. And knowing they filmed almost 50 episodes in 2 years and wrote and released and edited them, yeah, you wonder where we got to the point where we have 8 episodes of a season every 2 years. But real world issues also affected production, with Gillian Anderson falling pregnant around the time. So several of the storylines were changed, and it was decided that she'd be kidnapped by aliens. If she was pregnant though and needed some new clothes, then she could have checked out our merch store right below the video. We do have our X-File themed shirt there, along with lots of other ones and lots of big discounts. Now, if you missed our last breakdown, then we ended with Deep Throat being shot and the X-Files being disbanded. That's where we start off in episode 1 titled Little Green Men, and we get a history lesson on the Voyager. Right from the off, you can tell the budget's been upped, and though the effects haven't aged well, we go on a trip through the stars. Now, in case you don't know, basically NASA launched a capsule into space which included a golden disc that had messages and music from humanity. This had everything in place so that if an advanced life form found it, they'd be able to learn about humans. And since then, we've listened to hear if any messages will come back. We then cut to a listening station in Puerto Rico, which suddenly activates. Now, speaking of listening, we rejoin Mulder, who's now been forced to do mundane surveillance tasks. This includes listening to fraud cases, bank cases, and so on and so forth. The boring shit. As for Scully, she's back teaching at the academy, but clearly the two yearn to be back on the X-Files.
Are you okay, Agent Scully? You kind of sounded a little spooky.
Mulder looks beaten and completely ignores Scully at the department, and the lad's not shaved in like a day. Oh god! However, we learn the pair have been leaving messages for each other, which is denoted by a downturned picture frame. The pair then have a meeting at the parking lot of the Watergate Hotel, which feels like it's ripped right out of all the President's men. Scully even remarks that from a distance, Mulder looks like Deep Throat. He's been going through it as well, and Scully has literally called a meeting just to make sure he's okay. And yeah, he's not. In this scene, they compare Mulder's life to the real-life story of George Ellery Hale, who was responsible for building the Hale telescope. This was a pioneering piece of technology that unlocked some of the mysteries of the stars and was clearly an important advancement in humanity. However, there's just one thing, mate. Hale claimed to be visited by a quote-unquote elf who advised him on how to build the telescope. So, some little green men. He said it! He said it! So Mulder wonders that if Hale was just crazy and doing things irrationally, but Scully reassures him that even if Hale was crazy, he still created something fantastic because of it. And that's basically what Mulder's life's becoming. In what's a big scene for the series, we then get a flashback to the night of his sister's abduction. The kid they get to play Mulder looks identical, and they do a great job of showing just how harrowing it was. He's also summoned to meet Senator Richard Matheson, who we learn's a person that's been vouching for Mulder behind the scenes. If that name sounds familiar as well, it's because it's a little nod to the author Richard Matheson, who wrote I Am Legend. Matheson then tells them to head to the listening station and that he'll hold off the retrieval team that are getting ready to dispatch there. Upon arriving, he finds Jorge, who can't speak English, but he draws a picture of an alien. After running into the storm, Mulder then finds that he's died of fright. Upon taking his body back to the base, an alien appears and Mulder's gun fails before he then passes out. Now, Scully's been going through her own thing, and obviously, the FBI have been asking where the shit Mulder is. She goes to his apartment, which is when she's swarmed by agents, but she explains she was just there to feed his fishy cause he's missing, and they made promises that she'd do that. I shit you not. The agents even find a bit of paper with signals on, bin it, and then she does the old I've put too much fish food in, picks it out the bin, and then pretends to put the extra food in that, and then bins it and slips it up her sleeve. And the agents are like, I didn't see any of that. So she arrives there, and the pair are ecstatic that they've finally got proof. Unfortunately, the team arrive as well and chase the pair across the landscape. I told you the budget was going up. It's a big action scene for the series, and we hit the ground running in Washington. Though Skinner gives Mulder a talking to, he actually kicks the smoking man out of the room and decides not to discipline him. This is the first time as well that you're like, whoa, no way, mate. Skinner might actually be cool. Mulder finally examines the tape from the base, but it has been wiped due to a power surge, and though it's a dour way to end with him going back to his old beat, he's valiant in continuing his search for the truth. And that takes us into a Monster of the Week banger, and by banger, I mean a fucking banger. That is The Host, and this is one of the episodes I immediately think of when I think about the series. In it, we see a brand new creation for the show, rather than them relying on already established legends. After a man's grabbed in the introduction aboard a Russian ship, we see as his body's found in the USA. This is when similar attacks begin to happen, and Mulder's called in to investigate, but he initially views it as simply being grunt work. There's even a hilarious scene where he rocks up to the FBI to have a meeting with Skinner, whose secretary says he'll have to book an appointment. But he barges his way in and basically sees that Skinner is actually in a meeting, and he has to explain why he thinks he's wasting the FBI's time. Especially when everyone sees the X-Files as an actual waste of time themselves. But it turns out, mate, this is actually an X-Files. You didn't even realise. Beneath the sewers lives a fluke man, which is a parasitic human-worm hybrid that's either been born from radiation or toxic mutation. This plays upon post-Chernobyl fears, and there were documented genetic anomalies found in wildlife and humans.
I know these. These are from Chernobyl.
People also suspect alligators in the sewers, which played off a big conspiracy theory at the time. That may have been true. But yeah, the entry just taps into environmental fears, industrial waste, and EPA Superfund sites. During the making of it, Carter was apparently inspired by his dog having worms and a parasite documentary which further implanted the creepiness attached to them. He then drew the connection between that and the Alien franchise. The monster's capable of impregnating its host via bites, and these eggs eventually hatch in the host. So very, very alien. Parasites in general though, just really freak me out, and I've heard horror stories about people finding there's fluke worms living inside of them. So it all plays into that perfectly. Mulder also gets a mysterious call from someone, and this establishes the character Mr. X. X is sort of this season's deep throat, but we'll talk about him more in the other entries. But yeah, Mulder goes to Scully asking for advice, and it's clearly like old times for the pair. There's also a funny bit where they capture the fluke man, lock him up, and Skinner says they should move him to an institution and prosecute him like the criminal he is. And Mulder's like,
this is not a man. It's a monster. You can't put it in an institution.
Like fucking hell, Skinner. Skinner! Feel like Superintendent Chalmers shouting that. But to be fair, in the end, Scully brings lab results that the creature at one point was in fact human, which we'll talk more about later. Skinner also announces that the second person bitten by it died, and finally starts to see the good in Mulder's previous work.
Agent Scully and I might have been able to save that man's life, but you shut us down.
I know. This should have been an X-file.
As they're transporting the creature to an ambulance, it escapes to a campsite and then hides in a portaloo. That then gets cleaned and it's put into a tank and then transported through that. Mulder then gets a further call from X, who tells him success on this mission's imperative as the X-Files need to be reinstated. The truck's contents then dumped into the sewers, and Mulder goes down there with the supervisor, who of course gets pulled in. Though he doesn't die, Mulder has to face the creature himself, and he defeats it by cutting it in half using a pipe gateway. However, that wouldn't be the end of it, and we close out with it opening its eyes. It was then featured in the 2013 continuation comic called Season 10, which isn't to be confused with the actual Season 10. But there we got a 2-issue story titled Hosts. But yeah, this built up the ending and had the Fluke Man escape to Martha's Vineyard. This also fleshed out the Fluke Man's backstory as well, and revealed he was a liquidator who worked at Chernobyl. Named Gregory, he became locked in a sewage tanker and then got moved to the ship which was transporting the waste from the site. So that's how he came to be, and that's everything you need to know, and that takes us into episode 3. Now, I have forgotten the name of this.
There's blood.
Alright, Blood, yeah, it's Blood. And in it, we join postal worker Ed, who I'll always recognise as being the toy maker in Blade Runner. Working the machines, we see he gets a paper cut, and to make matters worse, he gets fired by his boss. In returning to his desk, he begins seeing things on the readout that say stuff like kill, hit the thumbs up, kill them all, so on and so forth. It's very akin to They Live and the subliminal messages in that, but this isn't a phenomena simply restricted to Ed. Across the rural farming town, we see as seemingly ordinary citizens descend into murderous rages due to messages they receive on digital readouts. Murders like this just don't happen in the style of town where they're at, and they even reference stuff like OJ in terms of how simple they are in comparison.
In Franklin, you'll never have to pull off the road to make way for a celebrity driving with a gun to his head.
And I think we even get a white Bronco in the montage around the 21-minute mark. Now, with advice from the lone gunman, we learn that these are the results of a government pesticide experiment. In it, they sprayed chemicals that amplify fear and paranoia in those who suffer from phobias, with Ed's being a fear of
blood. Blood. Crimson, copper-smelling blood. His blood. 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 Blood.
But things build towards a finale in which the show echoes the real-life 1966 Texas University shooter. Ed goes towards a blood drive at the university and ascends a clock tower with a rifle, just like that tragic day. Now, in case you don't know, during this real-life incident, a man named Charles Whitman killed his wife and mother and then climbed a tower and began indiscriminately shooting students. It's been adapted into lots of stories and was even mentioned during Full Metal Jacket. But the X-Files really plays into what Whitman blamed things on. Whitman left a note that said, "I didn't quite understand what it is that compels me to type this letter. Perhaps it is to leave some vague reason for the actions I've recently performed. I don't really understand myself these days. I am supposed to be an average, reasonable and intelligent young man. However, lately, I cannot recall when it started, have been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts. These thoughts constantly recur and it requires tremendous mental effort to concentrate on useful and progressive tasks." He actually later went on to request an autopsy to be performed on him to see if there was any biological cause for his issues. He had ever increasing headaches and said he had an insatiable bloodlust. So the show leans into that idea, and it's a really creative way to bring this tragic episode into a science fiction setting. Mulder witnesses strange things after being sprayed by the pesticide himself, and he begins to talk about subliminal messages. The characters even discuss how sometimes supermarkets would play subliminal messages to deter shoplifters, or how YouTubers will tell you to subscribe like 70 times randomly throughout the video. Makes for a really gripping episode though that doesn't rely on the monster of the week thing to play into the scares.
He's probably one of those people that thinks Elvis is dead.
Ooh, Elvis reference. When asked why the government did it, Mulder also simply says that fear is the oldest tool of power. We see it all the time today when the news constantly pushes fear of those around us and others, and will constantly do things to push us towards hate. It ties into lots of universal messages and things that were hot topics at the time. The 1990s had several controversial aerial sprays to combat fruit flies, which sparked public protests across America. There's also the writer behind this episode, Glenn Morgan's personal hematophobia, or fear of blood as it is. Plus things like MK Ultra and so on and so forth, and it all blends together perfectly into this episode that's ultimately about what people do when they're afraid. Ed going postal after being a postal worker as well is of course very on the nose, but it is something that clearly inspired the creators. But in the end, Mulder climbs the tower and manages to stop Ed mid-rampage by telling him how much blood there'll be if he continues. He's the only one who gets it, and he manages to take Eden alive. However, upon sitting down, he receives a subliminal message on his phone saying that it's all done, and he's left wondering what the plan actually was here. Did the government want a massacre like this to happen at a small town so they could further push fear and control? Well, that's certainly the feeling we're left with, and that takes us into episode 4. Titled Sleepless, that features Alex Krycek, and shout out to Just a Guy 7230 on our last video for pointing out that the actor behind him, who is a man called Nicholas Lee, also played a victim in the Gender Bender episode. This entry also features the unforgettable Tony Todd, who becomes the antagonist of the entry. We begin with a sleep-deprived scientist who has a vision of fire before his body's found badly burned. He made a call to 911 saying he was trapped and that there was a blaze outside his home. Everyone arrives there, emergency services, the agents, but the only issue is there was no fire at the scene. So what's going on? Well, it turns out that he was a pioneer when it came to studies in sleep deprivation, and that he was studying REM, not the band. The scientist was part of a military experiment, and now one of his subjects has come back to get revenge. Further playing off the MK Ultra themes, we also have clear nods to the Russian sleep experiment. This infamous urban legend told the tale of an experiment in the 40s where people were kept awake for 15 days using experimental gas. This led to insanity, self-mutilation, and ultimately unending horror for those that were part of it. The entry also plays into highly unethical human experimentation with things like the Tuskegee experiments and how high doses of radiation were tested on soldiers, completely without their knowledge. The Pentagon even carried out tests in which they did research into fatigue. They realized that sleep was a soldier's greatest enemy and that battles can be won or lost on tiredness, or because they're fatigued while wearing fatigues. It's a great thing to build a villain from though, and it questions why we even need sleep in the first place. I don't, mate. I'll watch a season of the X-Files in a day. The baddie is able to induce hallucinations psychically while someone sleeps though, and thus he can implant horrific images in their mind. The victims believe it's happening for real and thus die psychosomatically from cardiac arrest. We learn that in spending so long in the unconscious and conscious worlds that he was able to blend the two and thus mix the dream world with reality. Sort of like Freddy Krueger, but a bit, well, I was going to say grounded in reality, but it's not, but yeah, a bit more of a grounded Freddy Krueger. Todd does an outstanding job though as the haunting villain, and his unhinged, creepy, like chilling voice just elevates us so much. Mulder and Krycek also investigate his past, and though Fox initially shuts him out at first, the pair become uneasy allies. Krycek doesn't question Mulder's theories and actually goes along with most of them, which actually pisses Mulder off as he starts to miss Scully. They then track Todd's character Cole to an asylum where the doctor takes them to his cell. Turns out the doctor actually checked him out a couple days prior, even though he can't remember doing it. Mulder is also called by Mr. X, and the pair finally meet for the first time. He's very mysterious and clearly builds up the foundation laid by Deep Throat in Season 1. He's played by Stephen Williams, but the character was originally intended to be a woman. Natalia Nogalish was cast in the role and even shot a scene for the show. However, they didn't feel like the chemistry was right and decided to replace her with Williams. They also come across Uncle Rico, who, hey, it's always just nice seeing him. He was part of the experiment too and relays why they joined up to do them. Sold on the idea that it would be like living 2 lifetimes, they were able to double patrols, stay sharp, and be the best of the best of the best, sir.
The best of the best of the best, sir.
But doing this, they stopped adhering to the rules and ultimately went a bit off the rails. They killed women, children, and blew up a school because no one was willing to stop them. It's in this that we learn that Cole's nickname was also the Preacher because he was always reading from his Bible. He's come back to deal out divine justice for what went on there, and thus they figure out who else was part of the platoon and get to them before him. They don't manage to stop him though, and Cole's next target is shot and killed. Mulder's shot during this too, or so we think. Turns out Cole never even showed, and Mulder was simply asleep on the ground. Sleeping on the job, mate. Cole also takes a guy hostage, and Mulder and Krycek arrive just in time to find him still alive. Mulder then goes looking for Cole and finds him stood at the edge of a gigantic drop. Cole then tells Mulder to shoot him, but Fox puts down his gun in order to try and talk to him and try and understand. Asking if he'll testify, Cole has a bit of a breakdown talking about how they cut out parts of his brain and basically made him someone else, which is fantastic by Todd. The scene is brilliant. Krycek then arrives and slightly plays his hand with him shooting Cole, who appears to have a weapon pointed at Mulder. However, it's actually a Bible, and it speaks to not only his preacher nature, but also the trigger-happy mistakes often made by the authorities. Now, the reason I said plays his hand is because Krycek isn't all he seems to be. Initially he appears like a good guy, you know, he's always subscribing, always leaving nice comments, and he's a nice replacement for Scully. That's basically kind of the perfect partner for Mulder. However, the final scene of the episode has him reporting to the cigarette smoking man. He's a triple agent, and he says that reassigning the pair has only made Mulder and Scully double their efforts. Thus, they need to come up with a solution for Scully, and that takes us into our first 2-parter. Those are episodes 5 and 6, titled Dwayne Barry and Ascension respectively. I actually went to school with a lad called Dean Barry, and I used to think about him whenever I watched this episode. And if you're out there, Dean, I hope you're doing well. In it, we see the titular Barry grabbing a gun from the guard at his mental hospital and deciding to take everyone hostage. Barry has dreams of aliens abducting him, and thus Mulder's brought in to negotiate. He's the perfect opposite to Mulder, and we learn that Barry is actually ex-FBI. Obviously, this shows the potential future for Fox, in which he goes to the extreme ends of the UFO rabbit hole. In the opening, we see the Greys for the first time as well, and learn about how he was abducted. Barry's claims mirror the real reported incidents of Betty and Bonnie Hill in 1961, along with Travis Walton in 1975. There were also several psychiatric patients in books such as Communion, which dealt with the belief of alien abductions. It of course also deals with hostage negotiations that were famously portrayed in the film The Negotiator. Mulder does an apt job of dealing with Barry though, but to make things worse, he actually believes him a bit, so it's a bit of a moral quandary for him. Obviously, the snipers just want him lured near the windows though, but you can tell Mulder doesn't want to do it. And all the authorities are like, "Oh, Mulder, mate, oh, you're screwing it up, you crazy alien guy." A bright light also flashes at the side that makes time stop, and there's just some big moments in the episode. You also see the horror of alien abductions from Barry's perspective when he's pinned down and has holes drilled into his teeth. teeth, which freaked the shit out of me. Mulder probes about what may have happened to his sister, and Barry talks about the kids that he spotted while on the ship. They were experimented on as well, and it just sounds absolutely horrifying. On the flip side of this, Dana unearths that Barry was shot in the head and might just be making the whole thing up. Barry was actually inspired by Finney Gage, who apparently underwent a personality change after an accident drove an iron rod through his head. Dwayne was also originally named Dwayne Gary, but they had to change it after learning there was a real FBI agent with that name. He makes for a really striking character though, and you feel both scared and sympathetic for him. But yeah, everyone's conflicted, including the hostages.
I just want to say that I believe you.
As the police storm the building, Dwayne's then taken in and left in critical condition. Upon being examined, rare materials are found in his body, including holes in his molars, which weren't done with earthly technology. This part was also inspired by one of Carter's neighbors who said he'd been abducted. He actually stated a dentist checked over his mouth and said that the drill marks there weren't made by any technology he'd have access to. Scully says it's probably just shrapnel, but come on love, like last season you were handing over aliens. But yeah, Barry's knocked out, so it's all a wrap. Oh no, it's obviously a two-parter, and Barry awakens and decides to take Scully hostage. Barry refuses to be abducted again and becomes convinced that the creatures will take her instead. Episode 2 centers around the attempts to get her back, and it features a return of Scully's mother from season 1. Taking Dana to the site he was abducted at, it leads him up to the Skyline Mountains. It's very similar to stuff like Close Encounters and Fire in the Sky. Mulder races up the mountain way faster than he should, and Krychek decides to knock the controlman out to sabotage his ride. Mulder ends up climbing on top of a cable car, and it's a big action scene as he races up the mountain. It also shows you just how desperate he is to save his partner, because me mate, I would not be climbing on top of that shit. Upon getting to the top, Mulder finds out he's too late and sees a ship race off with Scully on board to go and have her baby. Enjoy your time off, Gillian. Be back in 2 months though, because we need you. Sorry. But yeah, Anderson did really say how grueling this entire schedule was and how filming the show was pretty much all her life turned into, to the point that she and Duchovny bitterly resented each other at one point. But they can laugh now. But they do kind of utilize that in the episode. The mountain thing happens at the midpoint and we get flashes of Scully on board the ship. This includes having her abdomen inflated by gas, which yeah, when she's pregnant, it looks like a really good effect. She's having a baby, but they inflate the stomach and say, oh yeah, they're doing it through the gas. They were even planning on having her remain pregnant throughout the season, having her give birth to an alien baby, but thankfully they gave her some time off. Like 6 weeks. Dwayne then dies after speaking with Krychek, and ultimately everything's covered up. The tagline for the episode is also deny everything, which replaces the usual the truth is out there, and is something said by Mr. X.
They only have one policy. Deny everything.
Although Mulder last season had been like guessing there was like soul transferences from looking at an agent for a second, he's not too quick when it comes to figuring out Krychek. However, he does tell Skinner that he's starting to suspect him. Skinner realizes he doesn't have control over the situation either and knows his superior put Krychek on the case, so he can't even control him. In the end, Skinner refuses to back down and he triumphantly says,
As of right now, I'm reopening the X-Files. That's what they fear the most.
It's a bittersweet ending, and though the X-Files are back, we really don't know what's going on with Scully. We close out with Mulder staring at the stars, and that takes us into episode 7, which is titled 3. Like episode 7, 3, not episode 3, because I know I've just said episode 2. I was talking about episode 2 being part 2. But yeah, with Scully gone, Mulder decides to do the only thing reasonable, which is go and investigate some sexy vampires. Ooh, sexy vampires. Going to LA, he meets the Trinity Killers, who are blood-drinking cultists that tend to kill several victims in a town before moving to the next one. Mulder captures a suspect at a blood bank who's convinced he'll have eternal life, and I always remember the scene where he's locked up in a cell and the sunlight slowly creeps towards him. He cowers in the shadows, and eventually it hits him and cooks him alive, which is something that, yeah, is just burned into my brain. Pun not intended. Before his death, he also tells Mulder he's part of a group called the Trinity, which is made of the Father, the Son, and the Unholy Ghost. In his apparent death, they find a stamp on him for a place called Club Tepes, which is named after Vlad Tepes, aka Vlad the Impaler. He was of course the inspiration for Dracula, and it's nice having this little subtle locale in the show. Scully's of course missing as well, and though the opening 10 minutes has a somber scene of Fox looking over their old things in the office, it's clear that when the cat's away, the Fox will come out to play. Thank you, thank you. Mulder starts up somewhat of a romantic relationship with one of the cult members, Kristen Keeler. Keeler, like killer, in case you wanted the subtext. Kristen is played by Perry Reeves though, who was actually dating Duchovny at the time. Plays on a lot of real world serial killers like the Manson family who attacked the wealthy in their mansions, like the opening scene, and we also have Richard Chase, who is nicknamed the Vampire of Sacramento. Beyond that, the 90s were filled with goth clubs that basically had blood drinking rituals which were documented in studies at the time, and it was a wild time to be alive. Mulder follows the gang to see if they're as legit as they say they are, or if they're simply people suffering from a disease. But they do attack the man that Kristen picks up, and 3 bite marks are found on his body, which does confirm that the son's come back to life. Mulder then checks out Kristen's background and learns that she lived in Memphis and Portland, which is where 2 attacks went down previously. Tracking her to a mansion home, we learn that she met the son in Chicago, which is where he formed the unholy trinity. After she and Mulder kiss, the son tells her that she must drink the blood of a believer in order to become one of them for good, and that involves killing him too. But yes, it turns out she's not actually part of them, and the unholy spirit's someone else. The sexual chemistry between the vampire and Mulder is off the charts though, and the pair have a sexy shaving scene that would make Skyfall shift in its chair awkwardly, especially when she cuts him and then tries to drink the blood. But obviously she decides against that and turns on the others during their planned attack on Mulder. She stabs the father and rushes Mulder out the house in a car, which is when the unholy spirit attacks. She's got super strength, but Kristen takes her out in the car and she rushes Mulder outside before covering herself in the sun and gasoline. She sparks up a match and blows herself up along with the mansion. So it's quite a tragic ending, but it also shows a more romantic side to Mulder. Duchovny had criticised the character for pretty much being a monk and thought that Dana's absence was the perfect time to just go and hook up with a vampire lady. In her death though, it just leaves him isolated further and he becomes a man who's lost another partner. However, Scully won't be gone for much longer and she does return in episode 8. That takes us into an entry in which not much happens, but it does deal with Scully's recovery and this feels like a necessary stepping stone to take us back to the status quo. Reappearing at a hospital in a comatose state, the doctors have no idea how she got there. Scully spends the entire episode in bed, which was done for practical reasons because Anderson had just given birth to her daughter Piper days before. Right love, you've had 2 days off? Get back to work! She's in a vegetative state and has requested that if this ever happens to her, then turn off the life support machine, which Mulder ironically bore witness to and even signed a statement for. The thing is though, he doesn't want to let her die, and we watch as he tries to get vengeance on the mysterious figures surrounding her disappearance. This includes him going toe-to-toe with a shadowy agent that Mr. X has to step in and kill for him. Mulder covers up the crime and it shows he's willing to work in the shadows as well. He also holds cigarette smoking man at gunpoint and we get to learn a bit more about Skinner. At one point Mulder types up his resignation, but Skinner arrives at the office and talks about himself for a bit. Turns out that he enlisted in Vietnam voluntarily and saw the horrors of war when a young boy wandered into camp strapped with grenades. Skinner blew his head off and that moment has sat with him. He was also severely injured and said he had an out-of-body experience. Though he was put in a body bag, they eventually found a pulse and he woke up in a hospital. He's refused to look beyond that moment, but admires Mulder doesn't stop looking. So he tells him his resignation's unacceptable. Turns out he actually tipped Mulder off as to where cigarette smoking man was at as well, and it speaks to how he's fine with getting other people to get their hands dirty if it proves to be good. He just can't do it himself because of his position of power, and if he gets fired, the whole thing's over. We also meet Scully's sister and watch as Dana goes on visions of consciousness throughout the episode. She's depicted on a boat sailing away from the shore, and when she gets closer to consciousness. On the dock there's also Mulder, her sister, and a member of the staff called Nurse Owens who's trying to get her back. But she drifts off at certain points and there's this constant push and pull. Her dad also visits her from beyond the grave wearing his naval uniform. He tells her that he loves her and it's the closure that she didn't really get in Beyond the Sea. Duchovny actually requested that the writers create a Beyond the Sea style episode for him, and while it doesn't quite hit that mark, it is still solid. Mulder is then once more met by X, who tells him that the people who did this to Scully will visit his apartment that night and search it. He sits there waiting with a gun, which is when Dana's sister arrives to get him. She pleads with him to go to the hospital, and though he's reluctant, he does eventually join her. Holding Dana's hand, he then speaks to her and soothes her. Mulder returns to his apartment to find it trashed, but the next day we learn Scully woke up. She says she remembers hearing his voice in the coma and that this is what made her return. Scully says she doesn't remember anything after being kidnapped, but that she'd like to thank Nurse Owens for her help. Just one problem there though, love. The hospital staff tell her that there's no nurse named Nurse Owens who works there. What? Now, while some have theorized that she's a member of the shadowy organization that was spying on the pair, Owens to me is more like a guardian angel. She tried to get her to come back to the shore and was someone willing her to move away from death. So instead, I see her as a manifestation of a spiritual guide and a kind figure who guided her through her trauma. They also plan on having Mulder spark up a romantic thing with Dana's sister Melissa, but ultimately that didn't come to pass. In the entry, we also get mention of a character called the Thinker, who later appears in the episode Anasazi. We'll talk about that later on in the video, but that takes us into episode 9. Now, last season we had Firestarter, Twisted Firestarter, and this season we get Firewalker, Twisted Firewalker. Scully's return is a monster of the week affair though that I don't actually think is that good. We see as a volcanic research team investigating volcanoes with their probe that's known as Firewalker discovers a parasite that incubates in a host and then bursts out their neck. It's very, very alien, with us getting a sort of play on the chest burster, but this time it's through the neck. And you already did it in the host, mate. But this is based off the back of organisms being found in hydrothermal vents during the 80s and 90s. There were theories that this could show that life exists on other planets in extreme environments, and NASA's Dante project has been sent into volcanoes just like this, so it was basically just the creators cashing in on it. There's also a badly burned guy who gets around killing some of the research crew, but as you guessed it, he's a good guy who's stopping the virus getting out. Mulder also worries if Scully's fully recovered enough to be in an assignment like this, but she's like, it's fine mate, the sooner we get back to normal the better. Move on. I was only gone a day and a half, mate. I'm finding it difficult to stand, but we're just getting back to the action. Feels very like the episode Ice though, and we see as the research crew slowly succumb to the parasites. The biggest surprise for me though was how big the supporting cast was, with there being several notable faces. There's Hiro Kanagawa, Bradley Whitford, and Leyland Orser, with them all doing a really good job. I do think the episode suffers because of the plot though, and it's not one that I think I'll ever go back to. Scully discovers that as long as you don't ingest the spores when they're first released, that they become absolutely harmless. Mulder also leaves the crazy scientist behind and just requests rescue for the two because the crazy guy didn't want to be rescued. He returns back to the volcano, taking the secrets of the site along with him, and the military also investigate the scene, but it's just one of them where it's just like, never mentioned again. Red Museum is where we go next, which involves walk-ins. Walk-ins are soul-possessing entities heavily tied with aliens, and you'll probably hear this term a lot in our upcoming breakdowns. In Season 7, we learn that walk-ins take over the bodies of children who are destined to die painful or agonizing deaths. These figures transport them to a better place during the child's point of suffering, and the walk-ins basically take over their body in that moment. This is something that Mulder eventually learns happened to his sister, and that was done to save her from suffering. But spoilers there, and walk-ins originated from the New Age channeling movement. That was something that really came to the forefront in the 70s. New Age channeling is a spiritual practice where a medium talks to entities, angels, and extraterrestrials in order to receive guidance. In Red Museum, we begin at a slaughterhouse and watch as a worker returns home. The son disappears and is found wandering near the woods with the words, "He is one," written on his back. This ties to a cult of vegetarians who live at an abandoned slaughter farm, which is seen as a monument to the dead. Or a red museum, you could say. They all wear white gowns with red turbans, which I'm sure someone will say it makes them look like a doctor. And wait, is that the guy from Aliens? Yes. But they believe that those who slaughter animals slaughter their own souls, and as a vegetarian myself, mate, bloody sign me up. I will dress as a doctor. We then get a scene where Mulder and Scully are at a rib restaurant and see one of the cult members getting bullied by the sheriff's son. Mulder breaks it up and the kid's like, mate, I'll tell my dad. And Mulder's like, yeah, mate, he'd fucking love to hear about this, mate. I know the lad. I'm fucking FBI, you punk. Upon returning home, the kid's girlfriend's kidnapped and she emerges in the woods with amnesia. This is something that builds off the opening where the kid was kidnapped, and basically he was found out in the woods and Mulder suspects that they're walk-ins. The cult suspects and leaders are brought in as well, which is when the group protests outside the rib joint. The sheriff's son then arrives to throw cow's blood on them, which of course echoes anti-protest stuff in real life. It's a big comment on meat production in general though, and an ex-farmer takes Scully to his old ranch. He talks about how he sold the farm because the industry changed for the worst. Now cattle are rounded up and kept in pens and fed grains, and the death is basically just reduced to industrial slaughter. He also points out how they inject new growth hormones into cows that may be having adverse side effects. Again, I'm holding my hands up as a veggie as well. Don't dislike the videos on this, you little shit. But I have seen a ton of this stuff online, and it was actually wild wild seeing them talking this in the 90s. Now curveball comes when the local doctor's plane crashes in a field. In the wreckage they find a suitcase full of money and a mysterious drug. Turns out the doctor delivered all the kids who went missing and none of them have ever had a day sick. What they have been doing though is visiting the doctor, who's been giving them quote unquote vitamins, or vitamins as they say in the good old US of A. Yeehaw! In the house of the boy who was kidnapped first, Mulder finds someone's been filming the family, and to make matters worse, the crew cut man from last season rolls into town and starts killing the farmers. He then kills the sheriff's kid as well, and it takes this episode from being your usual monster of the week thing to actually being an overall X-Files mythology one. Scully recognizes him as the man who shot Deep Throat, and they learn that the hormones are actually DNA. So it ties back to the finale of last season. This episode was actually supposed to be a crossover with a TV show Picket Fences, which did involve cows' guts exploding. Though the idea was nixed, I think it would have been interesting to see. The pair discover though that a local farmer named Jared Thomas is the one who's been filming the kids, and we learn that he's been keeping an eye on them. Examining the substance, this becomes known as purity control, and it is something that's basically shows the kids have been experimented on. The crew cut man has been brought in to clean this up and lock out the tainted beef, which has been causing further issues. It obviously plays on the fears of mad cow disease, which was a massive thing in the 90s. In case you don't know, this came about because cows had been ground down into food to feed other cows. Eventually this caused neurological disorders that caused beef to become infected, which was then passed on to humans, and this caused Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This caused rapid dementia, mood swings, and was extremely fatal, with those affected by it dying within months. It predominantly affected those aged 50 to 80, and yeah, obviously caused a shitload of panic. We will talk about that disease a bit more down the line because it does pop up in another episode, but very, very interesting how they brought that into the show. Things come to a head though with Mulder instructing them that they need to round up the doctor's patients as someone's currently cleaning house. They hide in the Church of the Red Museum with Mulder tracking down the crew cut man to the slaughterhouse. It's doused in gasoline and crew cut man locks Mulder in a freezer, but the sheriff arrives and kills him for killing his son. So yes, the man who shot Deep Throat is dead, and that's the end of the character. Now, as I'm sure you can guess, the creative team actually said they regret how easily he was taken out and kind of wish he'd been kept for further episodes. The secrets die with him though, and all the kids end up becoming sick, having missed out on their vitamin shots. However, the cult is okay because they're vegetarians, yay! Now they're fucking weirdos, mate, and it's even believed that the religion may have been created as its own control group to show what happened to those who didn't consume the beef. The episode then ends with things up in the air, and ultimately, it's all unsolved. Now look, mate, we've all heard the stereotype that old men at nursing homes are perverts, and things are taken to the extreme with that in the following episode. That is Excelsis Day, which means glory to God in the highest. We begin with a nurse who's doing the rounds and see the old men are all copping a feel, those dirty pieces of shit. Upon going into an empty room, the nurse is then pinned down and sexually assaulted by an invisible force. Gives lots of nods to the Invisible Man and how the central characters in those stories often carry out sexual crimes. The episode was also inspired by the real nursing home abuse scandals that garnered headlines in the 90s. Those scandals obviously still exist, but it was a big expose at the time. Accompanied with this were also debates on psychotropic drugs, with that being used on the elderly as part of patient care. That kind of leads into how this is done, with the residents not technically becoming invisible. Instead, they use a secret herbal drug derived from mushrooms that gives them an out-of-body experience. The patients are all test subjects who had late-stage dementia and were barely even able to talk, but this has reversed the effects. The patients seem like nice jolly guys when they're chatting with the agents, but behind closed doors, they're all pieces of shit. Because of the way they portray the old guys though, is basically like the critics from the Muppets, the episode got a lot of backlash for how it handled a sensitive subject. The subject matter itself with ghosts as well, that was also carried over into real life with there being some spooky things going on. During filming at the hospital, the creative team went into the bowels of the building and said they could hear mysterious voices. They then refused to go into there for fear that they might get struck by a ghost, so they didn't shoot much down there. Scully theorizes as well that the drugs are not only reversing their dementia, but also their vitality, which is what's allowing them to carry out the assaults. They also kill the aggressive orderlies and start to terrorize the staff and patients who are prepared to expose them. We learn that an orderly named Young Mitsun has been giving them the drugs, which he grows in the building's basement. Hailing from Malaysia, he says that everyone in the family all lives under one roof and that kids are taught to care for the elderly. In the West, it's the complete episode, and the old are sent away to places like this to die out the way. Patients barely get any visitors, and Young wanted to ease their suffering. We discover that shaman from his country used the mushrooms to speak with the dead, and this has given the patients these abilities. Things mount up because the main old guy Stan basically gets addicted to being out his body, and he raids a stash and takes it all at once, which you do.
Mushrooms? Gross!
He then traps Mulder and the nurse in the bathroom and turns on all the taps, which causes it to flood. This was apparently a nightmare to film as well, and when it later pours into the hallway, that was really difficult too. They actually had to build a gigantic tank that would flood the room, keep it locked from the corridor, then store some water so it could then flood the corridor. It's a great scene though, and Stan goes into a seizure, which Scully stops, and thus the attack ends. Come the final scene, we learn that Young's been deported for giving unchecked drugs to patients, and that they reverted to their dementia-ridden states. We then see Stan sat in silence while his daughter struggles to get a response, and close out the episode on his blank empty face. That takes us to Aubry, Missouri for the episode Aubry. In what would come to create a long-term partnership with Chris Carter, we meet your boy John Locke, aka Terry O'Quinn. O'Quinn plays Lieutenant Brian Tillman, and the actor would later appear in the X-Files film in '98 along with the 9th season episode Trust No One. The X-Files of course also had a sister series called Millennium, in which he'd also play the role of Peter Watts. Unfortunately, they're not all the same character, and I don't know what the word is, but I was a bit sad when I seen him pop up here and realised he was someone else. Because of his numerous appearances though, Quinn gained the nickname Mr. 1013 due to the studio behind the shows being called 1013 Productions.
I made this.
In it we join him as he's told by a colleague named Betty that she became pregnant from their affair. Deciding to meet at a motel to discuss it further, she's suddenly rocked by a strange vision. Seeing an old-fashioned car, she sees it careen into a field and then watches as a body's buried out there. Going to the exact spot, she digs up a corpse, and this is revealed to be of a missing detective. The only thing is that he died in 1942, long before Betty was born. This turns out to be Agent Sam Chaney, who was a pioneer in the development of stranger murders, or serial killers as they're known today. At the time, it was seen as some hokey-cokey nonsense that they'd use psychology to profile serial killers, but now it's of course been widely accepted. Scully jokes it's a bit like the X-Files and how we use aliens to explain everything. Either way, Betty, or BJ as she knows, and yes, Mulder does a joke that he's always wanted to meet a woman called BJ. BJ starts to figure things out that no one should really know. They find the word sister cut into the chests of victims along with brother cut into the agent. Seems like there's a copycat killer out there as well who's recreating the crimes. Now every time Betty looks in the mirror, she sees a man with a rash on his face staring back at her. She recognizes him from some old mugshots, and it turns out that this is Harry Coakley. He sexually assaulted a woman in 1945 and during this carved sister into her chest. But the police never tied this to the murders. So the agents go to visit Coakley, who was released from prison the year prior, but he strictly denies committing the latest murders. That night, Betty then wakes up with sister carved into her chest, and Harry's then arrested. But the guy is too old and infirm to carry out the crime, so maybe he can turn young, or he can take mushrooms and become a ghost or something. Now, what it is, mate, is it's a bit more grounded than that. When it comes to the X-Files anyway, they go and visit Harry's confirmed victim, and she reveals that the sexual assault resulted in a child. She put her up for adoption, and the FBI realized that the child was in fact Betty. Now, throughout, Betty goes back and forth over what to do with the pregnancy. The lieutenant wants the child aborted, but Betty comes round to the idea of keeping it. There's definitely the idea of parentage and genetics, and that's what ties into the twist. Mulder eats sunflower seeds throughout and remembers his dad eating them as well. He starts to wonder whether he actually liked them because he liked them, or if he had a genetic disposition to liking them. Mulder theorizes that Betty's the killer and that she may be operating off genetic instincts passed down from Harry. It's nature versus nurture, and it asks the question of whether evil can be inherited. Having kids myself as well, I'll see them do stuff just like me, like make a great TV show breakdown, and wonder whether it's in their genes to be the world's best YouTuber. But say you are related to a serial killer, then who knows, you might want to do that as well. They figure Betty's going to finish up the work and then go back to the original survivor, and she's now got the skin rash the baddie had and is dressed just like him. However, Betty manages to stop herself from going through with this and ends up attacking Harry directly. The agents then rush there and compel her to stop, but Harry dies anyway, having been attached from his oxygen machine. Betty then surrenders, and we learn she's attempted to self-abort in prison and has also tried to take her own life. Mentally she's broken, and Brian has said he'll adopt the child when they're born. But it's a really sad way to end the story, and we're left wondering whether the baby may be a killer as well. Now this wasn't really an episode that stuck out in my memory, but I really enjoyed going back to it. It had a lot of twists and turns, complex characters, and ultimately was a great study in genetic memory. The serial killer stuff doesn't stop there either, and we head into a standout in the season with the entry Irresistible. Simply irresistible. Sorry mate, been watching American Psycho a bit too much recently, but this is as grounded as it gets though, with Carter aiming to show that real world evil outweighs any made up monsters. In it we follow Donald Faster, who's based on Ed Gein. In case you don't know, he's seen as the godfather of serial killers, and he'd kill women and then make furniture out their skin. This led to him creating a house of horrors in which all manner of objects were made from human body parts. Donald is a 28-year-old. Wait, he's 28? You what?
You look so old.
Yeah, that's what they say in the episode there. He's 28. So Donald is a 28-year-old fetishist who initially desecrates the dead to steal women's hair, nails, skin, whatever you can think of. It's all just sort of the usual stuff that your typical 28-year-old does, but where things actually get bad is that he begins to turn his attention to the living. Donald's crimes ramp up as his obsession gets worse and he begins to fixate on women and girls around him. He gets a job as a delivery man and this gives him access to homes. Beyond that, he hunts women of the night and eventually becomes fixated on Scully. Now Donnie was initially going to be a necrophiliac as well, but Fox felt it might cause the episode to be met with issues in terms of broadcasting standards, so they made him just your run-of-the-mill serial killer. So things were toned down, but I have to say, even with that, the episode is creepy as hell. Nick Chunland is phenomenal as the killer, and he's absolutely terrifying throughout. Like, even when he's trying to be nice, he's just clearly a psychopath.
Is your hair normal or dry?
He was brilliant in Con Air, Chronicles of Riddick, and yeah, the guy is just a very chilling presence. He makes women bathe before killing them in freezing cold water and just has a sterile, detached persona that fits the role perfectly. At the time, serial killers were massive news, and Bundy and Dahmer were making lots of headlines. If you look at stuff today, you know, they're obviously still massive talking points, and there's been like thousands and thousands and thousands of documentaries on them. Back then though, in the 90s, we didn't know everything about them and they were still relatively new news. So shows like this really captured the interest because back then, we just didn't know. And yeah, to be fair, even these days, people are still fascinated, so you can imagine how interested people were in the 90s. You can see Donnie's clearly based on Bundy, and they wanted him to come across like the boy next door with a dark side. The final montage has pictures of him as a child, and Mulder talks about the horrors that America was dealing with.
The conquest of fear lies in the moment of its acceptance. In understanding what scares us most is that which is most familiar, most commonplace. That boy next door, Donnie Faster, the unremarkable younger brother of 4 older sisters, extraordinary only in his ordinariness, could grow up to be the devil in a button-down shirt. It's been said that the fear of the unknown is an irrational response to the excesses of the imagination, but our fear of the everyday, of the lurking stranger, and the sound of footfalls on the stairs, the fear of violent death and the primitive impulse to survive, are as frightening as any X-file, as real as the acceptance that it could happen to you.
So he fits that role perfectly, but they also mention the Milwaukee Monster, which was one of Dahmer's nicknames. Now I think I'd be remiss if I didn't touch upon one of the biggest questions around the episode. During it, we see minor moments where Donnie appears as a demon. This all comes to a head when Scully's kidnapped and she watches the character shapeshift in front of her. Now in order to discuss what this is, we have to talk about Scully's deepest fear. The creative team said that because she's so rational, she's not really scared of stuff like werewolves. Instead, her fear would be being killed by a man like Donnie and brutally killed as part of a fetish. Throughout the entry, we see she deals with the psychological aspects of coming across these young girls and clearly ponders what would happen if it were her. And she's obviously also just been kidnapped like 2 months ago, didn't get a day off after it. So yeah, it's all fresh in her mind. Scully even seems to have a sixth sense around Faster, in which she seems to sense there's something evil in him. She goes to therapy and also heads back to Washington, with Mulder clearly telling that something's rattled her. The writers said she'd not really had a chance to deal with Dwayne Barry, and this gave her the opportunity. Ever the professional though, she plays it down but appreciates that Fox cares. Beyond that though, this fear hits a high point when she sees Donnie change, and it completely plays into the supernatural. Or so you think. Obviously, with this episode being more grounded, that stuff can be seen as something left field. But in doing my research, I found that Carter and Co. looked at the witness testimonies of people who survived killers. According to Carter, there were reports of people who'd seen Jeffrey Dahmer shapeshift in front of them, and that during their hours alone, there were all sorts of strange things. Now, whether that was because of the fear, the drugs that they were on, or something else all entirely, I just like this idea that evil changes its form. Just heightens the episode so much and makes you wonder if Donnie is a demon among men. Carter was desperate to sell the idea of the monster next door and the fact its face could look like anyone. Ultimately, Donnie is caught though, but he will return in an entry down the line. The idea that evil can be its own entity that takes human form is also something we'll explore in other episodes. And I remember there being like a John Dogger episode that was heavily centered around it. But this is done in a really subtle way in which you can have a read like that or simply see it as a trick of the light or what the witnesses see when they're scared for their lives. Just like a 5-second thing in the episode, but these moments just stick with you long after things finish, and this is probably the episode I remember the most from this season. And we also get another Elvis line.
You know, people videotape police beatings on darkened streets. They managed to spot Elvis in 3 cities across America every day, but no one saw a pretty woman being forced off the road in her rental car.
But overall, it's a cracking episode that I definitely think is one you should stop by and watch if you're flicking through the seasons looking for those standout entries. And from here we go to Die verletzt.
That's German for the Bart. The.
No one who speaks German could be an evil man.
Now this is one of those episodes that I don't even think I saw as a kid, but that fucking image of Mrs. Paddock was everywhere for the show's promotion and it absolutely scared the shit out of me. You see kids, growing up there was this X-Files game that was really cool, that was kind of like a fixed camera survival horror game. Now, because I love this show so much and I love Resident Evil, I asked my parents for this game. Parents being parents though, they saw something called the X-Files game and thought that was the X-Files game. Which, what's wrong with you? No, so there were 2 games and the one they got me was actually a point and click adventure game that was basically sort of like an episode of the show where you'd click around and point on stuff. This would reveal text files and you'd have to read them and type answers and reply to emails and stuff. So not exactly what 10-year-old me was after. However, this did have clips from the episode as part of its bonus content, and I always remember this, and a clip from another episode that made me shit the bed. We will talk about that clip in an episode down the line, but I heard this episode was about a substitute teacher, and being a school kid myself, when I saw it, I think my imagination just ran wild and I shit myself for many a night. Die verletzt translates to the hand that wounds, which is something the characters say during the episode. We begin the entry in Milford Haven, New Hampshire, and join a group of high school teachers meeting at night, debating letting the kids perform Jesus Christ Superstar because it's got profanity in it or something. This initially seems like, as you know, that they're religious and they don't want to rock the boat. And they're like, I don't know if this is appropriate for a high school. Seems like quite a straightforward debate, but they then close the door and start praying to Satan. You what? Right from the off, it grabs your attention, and I think had I had the balls to watch this as a kid, I would have absolutely loved the episode. My childhood was filled with stuff like the Demon Headmaster and the Faculty, and interestingly, Laura Harris was a baddie in that movie, and she also features in this episode as well. Breakdown on the channel now. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff about teachers having something off with them, and I think this would have been one of the best of the best of the best Sir things I've ever seen. Now we join some teens after the title and watch as they participate in a similar prayer.
Rise to this place. Azazel.
Obviously for them, it's more like doing Bloody Mary in a mirror, but the ritual works and they summon something from hell. Playing off the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s, the FBI were fraught with real-life investigations into ritual murders. Eventually, most of them were debunked, but there was mass hysteria that heavy metal and TV shows were corrupting the youth.
He and his friends listened to devil music. The night Chicago died?
You know what I mean? Heavy metal bands that influence kids.
Wiccan subcultures were also rising as well, and people believed kids were being corrupted by Satan. It's the perfect place to ground an episode of The X-Files as well, because there's that side of reality to it where society was really dealing with these fears, but the show allowed them to ask, what if it was real? The show is water running backwards, frogs raining from the sky, which I also remember being a big thing in the 90s as well. And that is actually a natural phenomena in which strong winds and tornadoes form over bodies of water and pick up creatures like toads and tadpoles. They're then transported across the sky and either mature or are dropped down as a frog. But yeah, there's biblical plagues in Exodus that mention plagues of frogs raining down, and with the satanic panic going on, people were going crazy, mate. As Mulder points out though, even the Church of Satan has denounced murder, so there must be something else going on here. But the episode still handles it perfectly, I think, and Mrs. Paddock is such a good villain. Though the Satanists get a lot of focus, she's actually working on her own and more evil than they are. She starts off seeming like a kindly teacher, but slowly gets more and more creepy. We can't show it, but she gets the kids to dissect some baby pigs in science class, and one comes alive and starts squealing on the table. I think it's around this part of the series that the horror really starts to step it up, and maybe I was right to not watch this as a kid. The episode uses it perfectly though, and they drop what's arguably the most terrifying reveal so far. In it, we meet a teacher named Jim Aubry and his stepdaughter Shannon. Shannon says that her parents called her a breeder and repeatedly impregnated her during their rituals. They then sacrificed the babies as their blood was seen as being purer. They even apparently killed her little brother, and it's quite a shocking thing to come out the show. It's one of those scenes that I think the actress absolutely knocked it out of the park for, and I actually stopped taking notes just to take this scene in. Obviously, the agents go and question the parents right after this, with Scully going with the softly approach. Mulder, on the other hand, absolutely killed me, and his interrogation technique made me genuinely laugh out loud.
Did you do it?
Though the parents denied, Paddock takes one of Shannon's possessions and uses it to make her take her own life. The rest of the Satanists then meet to use Shannon as a scapegoat to cover up the crimes, but this doesn't really sit well with the stepdad. He doesn't like how Shannon was an innocent that's been brought into this, and that it goes against his beliefs. The episode actually pushes the idea that the members of the Satanic Church aren't actually as bad as their reputation says, and it was of course becoming a more popular religion at the time. But he goes to Mulder and tells him about the prayers, all the while denying the breeder stuff. Because of this, and well, the way he's kind of portrayed, people have wondered if what Shannon said was true. Now, personally, I don't think it is, and it has been theorized that Paddock was controlling her. It's never been cleared up, but yeah, they do make it seem like Aubry was telling the truth. But Mulder isn't too happy about it, and he wants to take him in. Mulder then gets a call from Scully, but it turns out this is Paddock pretending to be her. She does this after stealing her pen, and it does kind of explain what happened with Shannon. Mulder then goes to help her, leaving Aubry handcuffed in the basement, which is when a giant snake appears and eats him. Mulder and Scully then search the school, which is when the Satanists grab them. Turns out they figured out what's going on, and they just haven't been very good Satanists. The gang have all kind of wavered in their faith, and thus Satan has come to punish them. They're basically like people who watch the videos, enjoy all the breakdowns, and then don't subscribe. Paddock has come to clean up though, and while the agents are tied up, Paddock then makes them turn their weapons to themselves. Sorry guys, bit too late mate. Not enough souls sold to the devil, I'm afraid. You're gonna have to go. The agents then free themselves and come across Mrs. Paddock's classroom, where there's a message on the chalkboard. That simply says, "Goodbye, it's been nice working with you," which ominously ends the episode. Now because of this, people have assumed that Paddock was the devil himself, or herself. We are not sexist here. Scully is my favourite character in a way. However, I do feel like Paddock is actually more like a demon who's basically come to clean things up. Paddock was named after the toad demon from the Shakespearean play Macbeth, and I see her as someone tidying up the business. She's sort of middle management. She's being sent from head office because the franchise just isn't performing and she needs to fire some of the staff, which actually nicely ties into the working with you message. The final line was actually a meta joke as well, as writers Glenn Morgan and James Wong left the series after this episode. They'd been two of the big guys leading the show, and this final message was sort of a goodbye to the team. They will return down the line to work on the show in season 4 though, but for the meantime, it did seem like they were out. They came in for this one with the idea of playing with fire and doing something that you just didn't fully understand. So just in the same way the teens at the start conducted the spell that went awry, the adults were basically doing the same thing. They said there's stuff out there that's worse than you can imagine, and that it's best to not dance with the devil. They really looked into the demonic stuff as well, and beyond Paddock called the high school Crowley High School after occultist Aleister Crowley. Overall though, it's another great episode, with the season itself really hitting its stride here. Episode 15 is Fresh Bones, and that deals with voodoo. We visit a marine base at a Haitian refugee camp and see as lots of the soldiers are dying. Witnessing terrifying hallucinations, they're slowly sent insane until they cause their own deaths. Turns out that there's a priest who's able to raise the dead, and the Bokors creating zombies out of these fallen soldiers. Now if you've seen our Night of the Living Dead breakdown, then you'll know we talked in depth about the origins of zombies and voodoo culture. Voodoo, or voodoo as it was initially known, had zombies being controlled by a priest who would strip the person of their agency and make them a slave. Created in Haiti, it was clearly based around fears rooted in slavery, with the followers of the religion believing that was the worst thing that could happen to them.
The country was born on the blood of slaves.
freedom is our most sacred legacy.
Sometimes the priests would even be depicted as white men, and it's something that was used a lot in the film White Zombie. Romero then changed the game with his trilogy, but the origins differ a lot from what we think of when we think of zombies now. I'm not going to just rehash that script and go through all the history, because like the total section on it was like 5 to 10 minutes long, but yeah, if you want an in-depth history lesson on where zombies come from, head over to our Night of the Living Dead breakdown. But the episode itself is rooted heavily in real voodoo practices, and it also builds off the 90s Haitian refugee crisis. It also builds off Wade Davis's The Serpent and the Rainbow, which studied voodoo, magic, and zombies.
Wade Davis did extensive field research in Haiti on the zombification phenomenon. He analyzed several samples of zombie powder prepared by voodoo priests, and he found tetrodotoxin to be common to all of them.
Now, I actually think that this was the first episode I ever saw, and I remember watching it at my Auntie Stella's. My Uncle Brian was a massive sci-fi geek, and I remember like he had loads of graphic novels, and I'd go in and like try and touch them, and I could see the guy was stressing out. Being an adult now with lots of graphic novels myself, I feel that stress whenever my kids walk in the room as well. But yeah, he loved Star Trek and this was the first one I remember watching. I think like 10 minutes in, my auntie came into the room and said I had to turn it off, and I also remember him being like, it's fine, he doesn't mind. And I did mind, I did shit myself. But then I fell in love with it and started watching it with my grandma when I was a bit older. But this episode, yeah, burned into my memory. Corpses in the morgue are then replaced by the bodies of dead wolves. Dead soldiers are found wandering the road, and their vacant expressions make them seem like a zombie. It's a much more grounded episode than what you typically expect with zombies, but I think it's got a really creepy undercurrent due to all the bodies. There's body snatching and a young kill called Chester Bonaparte who adds some levity to the episode as well. Or so it seems. Private warns the agents that the kid's in on it too, and very, very evil. We also learn that they're in dispute with the colonel because he's been beating the refugees. They just want to return to Haiti, but the army refuses to do it. So the priest told the colonel he would take the souls of the soldiers, and though they mocked it, it looks like it's happening. We learn this soldier specifically's wife took ill on their wedding day, and that when she died, they found a stomach full of snakes. Chester then flees to the docks and disappears, but Mulder finds a cat there. They then confront the colonel, who's pretty much refusing to offer safe and sanitary conditions to the refugees, and the camp has become somewhat a prison. Even his ham and egg bleeding doesn't change his mind, and to make things worse, Mulder and Scully are mocked. The priest is then murdered in his cell, and the reanimated soldier from the start signs a confession pinning the crimes on himself, and no one can understand why. In the end though, the agents find a photo of Haiti that shows both the priest and colonel together in the country. Turns out, the colonel's a priest himself, and he's trying to raise the other priest to become his zombie. Going to his grave to perform a ritual, Mulder races to the site. Scully is a bit worse for wear though, so she remains in the car and then out of a wound climbs a man out like right out of her hand, which is a mental effect at the time. Even now it's still mental. This freaked the hell out of me though when I was younger because yeah, it just comes out of nowhere and he grabs her by the throat. Scully manages to grab the charm that Chester sold them though, and the figure disappears, and we then see that cat that is clearly Chester again. At the graveyard itself, the original priest then rises to kill the colonel, and the agents find his corpse in a coffin seemingly at rest. In the end, we discover the first soldiers recovered and that they're shipping the refugees' bodies back to Haiti. We also learn that Chester apparently died weeks ago, and yeah, quite a somber moment because he's been walking around all this time. What are you on about? But yeah, even after all that, Scully is still like, nothing strange going on here, mate. We'll be back next week and I'll be saying everything's fine. You're mental, Mulder, thinking this is something supernatural. We then close out with the colonel being buried alive, and it's probably up there as one of the best closing scenes we've had so far. As for episode 16, that takes us into another two-parter. First we have Colony, which is followed by Endgame, and the two entries tying to the UFO mythology.
We're in the Endgame now.
What we've got here though is the introduction of one of my favourite characters, which is the shape-shifting alien bounty hunter. Mulder's sister comes back as well, though we will talk about that later, and we also get confirmation of humans being injected with alien DNA, which as of writing this part of the video, Matt Gates has said is apparently a real thing.
I had someone come and brief me who was in a military uniform, worked for the United States Army, that was briefing me on the locations of hybrid breeding programs where captured aliens were breeding with humans to create some hybrid race that could engage in intergalactic communication.
And this is like top 5 down the list on craziest things going on this week. In case you're wondering, I'm making this bit on Easter weekend, so yeah, if you remember what was going down back then, let me know how things turned out in the comments below. Did it get any better? But no fucking chance. But yeah, the bounty hunter is played by the unforgettable Brian Thompson, who's just a standout in the series. Even though when I was growing up, I wasn't really interested in the UFO episodes, I always remember being like, oh shit, whenever he arrived. Kind of feel like they learned from killing off Crew Cut Man and decided that having a reoccurring killer that doesn't die on their second appearance was a smarter way to go. I remember as a kid thinking he was just like Arnie in the Terminator, and I did wonder if they cast Thompson because of his look. But he's basically an unstoppable assassin who bleeds green toxic blood, so even if you shoot him, you're just screwing yourself. The only way to kill him is to pierce the base of his neck, but you've pretty much got to get up close to a 7-foot guy who's built like a bodybuilder. So Thompson easily plays by far the most intimidating character in the show. And yes, I will forgive him for Mortal Kombat Annihilation. Character was actually supposed to be a pilot though, an alien pilot, so they told Thompson to get himself a crew cut. However, he showed up with a different hairstyle and said there must have been a misunderstanding. But they liked the look, and obviously, you know, this is how the character stays throughout the series. Now we begin with Mulder's body looking a little worse for wear and Scully rushing to the doctor who returns from Firewalker. Mulder is freezing cold and they want to warm his body up in a bath, but she demands that he be kept at that temperature rather than doing the usual thing to get him back to normal. The episode then tells the story of how we got here. Journeying back to 2 weeks before, we see as a boat rescues the bounty hunter after his ship lands in the Beaufort Sea. The bounty hunter then travels to Pennsylvania and kills the doctor in an abortion clinic. He does so with a sharp needle-like object that he thrusts into the back of their neck. Some green blood pops out, and we then see a couple days later as Mulder receives the obituary along with 2 other identical-looking doctors. The agents then send a fellow FBI agent to get one of these other men, and he arrives to see him getting murdered. The agent then enters and shoots the bounty hunter, but his green blood causes his eyes to flare up. The bounty hunter then takes his face and tells Mulder and Scully that the doctor wasn't home. Now the real agent's body is eventually found, and the Skinner's like, they make this too much murder, too much weird shit. We're closing down the case. However, Mulder's contacted by a CIA agent named Ambrose Chapel. Chapel meets with Mulder and tells him the doctors are clones, which kind of builds off the plot of Eve from season 1. Or so we think. I'll talk about what they really are later, but you might have guessed that they're actually aliens. He says they're being targeted by the US and Russian governments because of what they know. He says this stuff's been going on for decades, and then Mulder, Scully and Chapel head to another doctor's house. Upon getting there though, the doc freaks out when seeing Chapel and dun dun dun, yeah you guessed it, it's actually the bounty hunter. The doc then throws himself out the window and flees, but eventually Chapel catches up to him. The doc's killed, and Scully arrives with Chapel saying he made it to the roof. But she does step in some green blood and starts to suspect that Chapel isn't who he says he is. Eventually, she's led to a lab the doctor was working at, which she finds Chapel destroying. Now, while all this is going on, we get some family time with Mulder. He gets a call from his mother and father saying that he has to come home. Though his dad was mentioned last season, this is the first time we meet him for real. Named Bill, we join him with someone who's mysteriously returned home. That is Samantha, who by all intents and purposes seems completely healthy. So that's case closed, mate. Mulder finally found his sister. Let's pack the series up, boys, and go home. We did it. Well, obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that, and if you know the show, you'll know the search doesn't stop here. On the surface, though, everything seems like it checks out. Sam says she was abducted, just like Mulder remembers, and that she was returned back to Earth around the age of 9 or 10. She was then given to an adoptive family who are apparently visitors to Earth, but her memories were repressed, and it was only in adulthood when she suffered from anxiety that she decided to go to therapy. Under hypnosis, she remembered what happened and then returned home. It's kind of devastating because her family believes she's come back, and you see the relief because they never gave up hope. Her mother Tina even says that after all her sleepless nights, she can't believe that she can't stay awake now. In hindsight, it's what makes this even more devastating, as it's clear they all want to believe. The next day, Sam then tells Fox that the hunters finished off most of the clones and will now start hunting her and her parents. She says that the killer can look like anyone, but she's capable of recognizing him beyond that. Now while this is going on, Scully makes a call on a bus to Mulder, saying she's sure she hasn't been followed. She tells him the motel she's staying at, and yeah, as you can see, we pan out to see the bounty hunters sitting on the bus, like 2 seats down, not even in disguise. She eventually goes to a lab though where the final 4 clone doctors are hiding out and they're taken to a jail. Your boy the bounty hunter then arrives in disguise and takes them out, and we get another absolutely unforgettable ending. We go back to Scully's motel and see as there's a knock at the door. Scully answers it to see that it's Mulder and obviously lets him in the room. However, just as she starts to feel safe, we watch as her phone rings and she gets a call from none other than Mulder. I always remember this being shown on TV to promote the show, and it's a massive cliffhanger. That's probably one of the series' best moments. Now, the joys of home media mean we don't have to wait a week to find out what happened next, but I can imagine at the time this was an agonizing wait. It's such a good episode though, and the best of the UFO ones so far, in my opinion. This was actually Duchovny's first credit as a story writer, as he came up with the idea of an alien bounty hunter. They then thought they could tie that into his sister and that this could build into the overall mythology. Megan Leach does a great job as Samantha as well, and she will appear in just a bit, but yep, they struck gold with the casting. She's got a sort of meek girl next door thing going on, and yeah, does a fantastic job. Now, why is it called Colony, mate? Well, it turns out that aliens have been here for a while and are planning on building a colony. This will mix alien blood with human blood and we'll get like hybrid aliens. Woo woo!
They turn the friggin' frogs gay!
Sexy hybrid aliens that can look like anyone. Rebecca Romaine.
Patriot.
Cameron Diaz in The Mask.
Patriot.
Alicia Keys.
Vampire.
Halle Berry in The Flintstones.
X-Low.
That sort of thing.
A scared man. Really?
The reason the doctors worked at abortion clinics though is because they'd have access to fetal tissue and could further advance their hybrid race. However, there's a bunch of purebred aliens who are disgusted by the idea of their kind mixing with humans, and thus the bounty hunters come to clear things up. You bloody speciest? Anyway, Endgame sees the budget really skyrocket, and we begin with the atomic sub, the USS Allegiance. Out in the Beaufort Sea, we watch as the vessel comes across the alien ship. The craft disables the sub and strands it in the ice, and this sets things up for where we take the rest of the episode. Oh right, you care about what happened to Scully. Well, we see she stands up to Mulder and tells him to face the wall. He's like, what the hell's going on, Scully?
Scully, what are you doing?
But still cooperates, and I have to admit, I was like, man, is this guy actually Mulder? And was the fake on the phone, or is the phone one the real one? I was very anxious watching it and I'd already seen the episode. But we see as he goes to reach for his ID and then hits her with a swift takedown and reveals he's in fact the bounty hunter. Mirroring the kidnap at the hands of Dwayne Barry, Scully's grabbed once more and he contacts Mulder, who says he'll give her over in exchange for Sam. Obviously, Mulder's not happy, but Sam is down and sees it as the best chance they'll get to take out the bad guy. Arriving at a bridge, they have sharpshooters all around and one takes a shot when Sam and the killer are wrestling. Both go into the river and the search team can't see any sight of them. Mulder's dad's not happy though, and they have a pretty heart-wrenching scene where he's clearly devastated that Fox has lost Samantha. Again, he basically lays into him, he's like, you're a piece of shit son, but as we'll discover later in the other seasons, I don't know if you should be saying that, mate. But yeah, Bill says Sam gave him a note saying where to meet if the pair were ever separated, and this leads Mulder to a clinic. However, Scully rings to give him some bad news, and she informs Fox his sister washed up on the shore and that she's sadly passed away. Mulder is devastated, but he still heads to the clinic anyway, and with Scully we see as Sam's body starts to disintegrate into that weird green blood. Things clearly aren't what they seem, and we get a similar scene to when Scully came across the clones earlier. Instead of the doctors though, we see as Mulder sees these are all clones of Samantha. They reveal that they sent a duplicate and that the real Sam is here, mate. Unfortunately, the bounty hunter arrives, burns the place down, and seemingly kills all the clones. Devastated, Mulder meets X, who tells him about the sub and that the answers will be there. This is kind of when Mulder goes AWOL and Scully desperately searches for him with Skinner. They have like a hilarious scene where Scully sees X at Mulder's apartment and she just keeps asking what's going on, and he just plays dumb the whole time, does a really good poker face, but also a very suspicious one as well.
Sorry, I must have the wrong apartment.
Where's Mulder? I need to know, damn it!
I'm sorry, you've mistaken me for someone else.
I'm losing time!
I'm sorry. I can't help you.
Skinner doesn't put up with that shit though, and the pair fight in a lift, which is how he gets Mulder's whereabouts. It's a really badass scene for Skinner and shows that when it comes down to it, he really has the agent's best interests at heart and will even get his hands dirty for it. During this, Scully also learns more about the reaction to the blood, and if you're exposed to the virus, then the way to beat it is to remain cold. The temperature pretty much wipes it out and it allows the body to fight it off. Now, this is where things really ramp up and we see as Mulder makes it to the sub in the Arctic. This was kind of on the crew's wish list for a while, and they'd wanted to do something similar for the episode Ice, but just didn't have the budget for it. They used the interior of the HMCS Mackenzie and also brought in 140 tons of snow to create the set. That sub was then reused in the episode Dudecom or Deadcom or Dodcom, however it's pronounced, which we will talk about in just a bit. The really iconic set though, and just seeing the top of the sub popping out the ice is something that's always stuck with me. Fox seemingly finds a sole surviving member of the crew, but after questioning him, he quickly realizes he is in fact the bounty hunter. Everyone's a bounty. You're the bounty hunter. The hunter tells him he could have killed him several times, but Mulder doesn't heed his mercy and he shoots him in the back, which exposes him to the blood. Frantically, Mulder begs the killer to tell him whether Samantha's still alive, and he confirms she is before then throwing him out the sub. We then get a great moment where it begins to sink and he's almost cut in half as the diving plane slowly moves towards him. But he's quickly rescued and we come back to the first scene where Scully tells them to keep him cold to beat the virus. Now, though it's been a pretty sad couple of episodes when it comes to stuff like Sam returning, being revealed to be a trick, it's actually a story that ends on a more hopeful note. From the hospital bed, Mulder says that he's regained something he thought he lost, which is the hope that he'll find his sister again. The bounty hunter's words have renewed his faith, and he will now continue to believe. Tops off what is a set of the strongest episodes in the show so far, and the entries are some of the best UFO-centered things that I think I've ever seen. Now at the channel, working in YouTube, mate, we'll have a saying, mate, because obviously, you know, we pump out a lot of videos, and some of them are gonna do really, really well, just like this one. The viewers love them. You'll get loads of views and subscribers, and it'll be a great video. But that can't always be the case, and sometimes a video just flops. You miss the mark, or you simply don't have the time to make something as good as you'd like, or maybe the subject matter is terrible, or something's just bad, and the video does terrible. Now that's a long-winded way of saying, the saying at the channel is, they can't all be bangers, and that's what I feel about this episode, Fearful Symmetry. In it, zoo animals are turned invisible and they escape their pens before terrorizing people in the neighboring city. The zoo's then put under question. There's animal rights activists who are brought into it as well, but it's all revealed to in fact be aliens. They're abducting the creatures and carrying out experiments and basically working towards further hybridization. After the two bangers we've just had as well, this felt ridiculous and I just didn't really enjoy this episode at all. I will admit though, the opening where we have an invisible elephant terrorizing the streets, that's good, but then we get stuff like a gorilla that's just a person in a suit making terrible grunts, and overall, just doesn't work for me. Zoo escape incidents were a big thing in the 90s though, and they were led by animal rights activists, but we also had cattle mutilation, which people chalked up to aliens. But I don't know, like, it just doesn't work with zoo animals for some reason. The gorilla even disappears in a bright white light at one point, and I was like, oh, come on guys, I thought we were past this stuff. Turns out though, the aliens are abducting the animals to impregnate them, which will save their species because humans don't give a shit about animals and are running them to extinction. In the end, it's basically about protecting animals, and look mate, I know I've mentioned I'm a vegetarian already, which I pretty much did overnight after seeing a horrendous slaughterhouse video, so I'm all in on this protecting animal shit, mate. But yeah, the execution of this episode is terrible. So right message, wrong story, and overall, this is my least favorite episode out of the entire series so far. Well, sadly, Dodecom is also an episode that has a cool concept, but the execution is pretty bad. The execution and the makeup as well. Oh god, oh no! In it, we start off in the Norwegian sea and watch as soldiers abandon their ride rather than remaining there. Jumping ahead 18 hours, we see why. The crew's rescued by a passing boat, and it turns out they've aged decades in the time past. So they went to the beach they went to the sea that makes you grow old. Now obviously, it's a case fit for Mulder and Scully, so they track down the ship and travel on board. They find the vessel completely abandoned, and the ghost ship snares them in their grasp. Things quickly turn south, and the pair find themselves aging rapidly as well with the crew they traveled there with. They then turn on them to survive a little bit longer, and it's basically everyone scrapping over themselves to get like 1 minute extra life. Now, the entry itself is based around a number of things, and I'm sure you've all heard of the maritime ghost ships such as the Mary Celeste and Flying Dutchman. The crew just vanishing into thin air has fascinated people for centuries, and setting an X-File on board one is much inspired. They also touch upon how they may have slipped through a wrinkle in time and bring up the Philadelphia experiment. In case you haven't watched the movie or heard the tales, there's been a long-standing conspiracy theory that during 1943, the US Navy tried to turn the USS Eldridge invisible to radar. However, it was believed this had a number of insane outcomes. People thought that it may have actually turned invisible, that it may have teleported, or even have travelled through time. Most agree that it was a hoax though, and it basically came about because during 1955, a man named Carl M had been, they found letters belonging to him where he talked about this experiment or something. But obviously the legends persisted because it's very, very fascinating, and it was even thought that when the crew returned, they'd been fused into the walls and stuff. And yeah, just hearing stuff like that, rumours, lots of different supernatural stuff, it just completely took the public's interest by storm. Now, I think we'd be remiss for not talking about the Bermuda Triangle as well, and it even gets name dropped in the episode. Mulder talks about how it's the Norwegian version and that there's been a history of ships disappearing at the 65th parallel. He also says that all those involved in the Philadelphia experiment went to work at Roswell and believes that something else is afoot. So yeah, it's an excellent concept, but things really kind of hit the brakes when we hit the ship. Everyone gets old straight away, and they pretty much just sit down for most of the episode wondering how to fix things. Like Mulder literally just wraps a blanket around himself at the midpoint and pretty much just sits in the same spot for the rest of the episode. Scully really takes the lead though and begins to figure things out. They find a Norwegian whaler on board hasn't been affected by the aging, and Scully also figures out that the ship is sailing beside a strange object beneath the surface. It's big and metallic and there were strange lights moving below the water. But yeah, this has caused rapid oxidization to whatever passes through it. So it will cause a ship to rust and rot away, and a human to gain free radicals that rapidly age them. In this they realise that only the ship's sewage pipe is the one not corroding, and that drinking this recycled water is how the pirates stayed young. He's killed by the person who escorted them there, and then we watch as he goes crazy in an attempt to desperately stay alive. It's a lot like the episode Ice, but I don't feel like the paranoia really sets in well enough. Eventually the ship rots away and begins to sink, which kills the captain, who's locked himself away with all the untainted water. As for the agents, they just fall asleep and are then rescued by a medical team who checked out Scully's notes. They wake up in hospital and her notes have been used to reverse their aging and everything is a-okay. So yeah, it doesn't really go anywhere, and it would have been a great episode I think if they did more with it. Hell, Old is like basically the same concept but executed infinitely better, and that's still not great. The makeup again is terrible though, and I think that they knew it, which is why most of the episode is shot in a very, very dark room. I'm not even kidding, like pretty much all of it is shot heavily in shadow, almost like they're hiding it. Did feel like they were hitting a lull at this point though, and Carter even said that this was downtime by design. The team had worked so hard over the season so far that they said this episode was the quote-unquote great rest, which would allow them to recover. So that's why they reused the set and had the actors basically just sitting in the same room chilling. Only thing is, mate, this ended up being something the cast called the episode from hell. The ship was cramped and it made it uncomfortable to film in, and the actors had to sit in makeup for like 45 hours a day. It's enough to make you say humbug, which is where we go for episode 20. And it's always one to remember. We start off with some kids playing in a pool at night and see as something strange watches from the trees. Ooh, scary. His skin's all scaly and he looks absolutely terrifying, and we can see as he slips into the pool. Ooh, oh god. The figure then pounces on the pair, but we realise, oh, it's just their dad. Their pops is actually just a freak show performer who's known as the Alligator Man. Now it's past the kids' bedtime, so he scuttles them off to bed, but something else then enters the pool. This creature then brutally attacks him, and it's here that we cut to the titles. Now the episode is basically a murder mystery with all kinds of people making up the suspects. Freak shows are obviously, something that's fascinated people for centuries, and the show does a lot by using that as a backdrop. They have a whole host of people with different afflictions, but what I love is that the show breaks the stereotypes and goes out of its way to show them as complex three-dimensional people.
It's what's inside that counts, and on the inside, they're as normal as anybody.
Even the Alligator Man has a family and was clearly a caring and loving husband and father. Michael J. Anderson also comes over from Twin Peaks, and Mulder incorrectly guesses that he used to work as part of the show. But the guy kind of berates him and talks about how Mulder assumes that just because he's little, but he actually has a degree in hotel management. I love the end as well, where one of the performers talks about how it's in nature's nature to create something different once in a while, otherwise we'd all end up looking like Mulder. Bloody handsome Mulder, standing there looking dashing. But he says nature abhors normality, and in the future when everyone uses plastic surgery and genetics to look perfect, it will be the self-made freaks to remind us of that fact. The guy who says that is even ostracized from the real freaks because he's a self-made one. That's alongside his geek sidekick, the Conundrum, who's played by the Enigma, who I remember seeing many a YouTube video on. A geek is meant in its original term here from when it gained popularity during travelling circuses, and that used to mean a person who'd eat anything. If you've ever seen Nightmare Alley, then you'll know that role is kind of pivotal to the plot. As the performers start to get picked off one by one though, the agents attempt to uncover the truth alongside the local sheriff of the town. Mulder initially suspects it may be the Fiji mermaid, which is one of the most famous hoaxes in history. In case you don't know, P.T. Barnum basically said he owned the corpse of a mermaid and he travelled America charging people to see it. It was actually the upper half of a monkey that had been stitched together with a fish. It was likely created by Japanese fishermen, but it remained a tourist attraction in the 1800s. The wild thing is though that even after it was exposed as a fake, people still wanted to see it. This plays into the titular humbug, which in its literal definition means a deceptive or dishonest hoax. Now Mulder theorizes that the hoax story was actually a hoax and that the mermaid itself was actually real. It lines up with some of the shots that we've seen of the creature so far, and yeah, just having that as a villain, it is quite different. Now before getting to what's going on, they do suspect a number of different people, and even the sheriff is revealed to be a secret freak. Turns out when he was younger, he was a dog-faced boy, but he lost all the hair when he got older and started going bald, and it happens to us all. In the end though, the villain's revealed to be someone you'd least suspect in Vincent Schiavelli's Lanny. Well, not exactly that, but we will get into it. Now I know the guy is obviously a pretty famous face, but they do a great job of throwing you off the scent. Lanny is a sympathetic alcoholic who we learn has a dead conjoined twin on his torso. This is also a humbug in itself because, as we learn, the twin ain't dead. Leonard is able to detach himself from Lanny, and we learn he's been looking for a new brother. Lanny's drinking has led him to get liver failure, and thus the twin wants somebody else. He's been burrowing himself into his victims in the hopes he can find a new home. The agents tackle the creature in a hall of mirrors, which is also a great place for a final showdown. Obviously, you know, it's difficult to do a lot with like a little Fiji mermaid puppet thing, but the mirrors obscure it and it plays into your paranoia. However, the agents don't manage to get it, and we watch as it scurries away. Goes up to the geek and is then strangely missing the next day. Lanny sadly dies of a broken heart, and we see as the geek and his partner drive off, with the latter looking a bit sick.
Probably something I ate.
Hey, wait a second. Yes, Leonard is now in him, and that closes out the episode. Overall though, it's a great entry, and it was nice seeing a Twin Peaks reunion with Duchovny starring in that as well. It was also Darren Morgan's first script for the series, and he'd actually played the Fluke Man in The Host. He said he was uncomfortable initially when writing the episode, as primarily he worked as a comedy writer. And in his words, this wasn't a comedy show. However, I think me and a lot of fans agree that some of the best X-Files stuff is when they play it tongue-in-cheek. It really adds a lot of dynamics to the show when you can have like the most fucked up episode one week centered around like satanic rituals, and then the next you're just sitting back having a good old laugh, mate. Up until this point as well, pretty much all the characters who were perceived as normal were the ones who weren't fitting in. This shows that not everything needs to be viewed as people being freaks, and that we all have things about ourselves that make us human. Except for like the little fucking Fiji mermaid guy. In it though, the agents are the outsiders, and amongst the freaks, they're the ones who aren't normal. Duchovny even said his favourite thing about Darren was that he seemed to be actively trying to destroy the show. It's a great comment on challenging stereotypes, exploitation, and is up there as a standout in the season. And it's just a laugh as well, mate. So where do we go next? Well, it's the spirits of demonic children being killed in ancient Romanian rituals. Now, I touched upon the X-Files game earlier, and the exorcism clip from that was the other thing that made me shit the bed. This episode was so extreme and actually got an 18 in the UK, and it was explicitly stated, do not show this to kids. Anyway, son, here's the fun X-Files game. Now in it, we follow a family made up of Mother Maggie, Father Steve, and their two children, Teddy and Charlie. Teddy is a kid who wants his brother's balloon, so naturally, the parents give it to the younger child. But you fucked up worse than giving him the X-Files game, and within seconds, he's chasing his balloon onto the park's miniature train tracks before getting brutally mowed down. The helium balloon then returns to Charlie against the wind, and that's it, mate. You've got yourself an X-Files. We watch as the agents investigate the family, who discover also live with Maggie's elderly mother, Golda. The pair are both immigrants from Romania, with them kind of clashing over cultures. Maggie just sees the death as a terrible accident, whereas Golda swears the child is the devil. Poor Steve's like, oh, just fucking sick of this, mate. And Mulder draws swastikas on the boy in order to mock him. Now, drawing swastikas on a kid, you know, can be a bit problematic, but typically this was used as a symbol for protection. It was seen as like a big thing in religion until some party in the 30s changed the meaning of what people tend to think of when they see it. Scully then initially suggests it's Munchausen by proxy, but as you've probably guessed, it's something much darker. Now, obviously, you know, The Exorcist is a stone cold classic, and I think it's one of those films that goes beyond being a horror. It's clear that the episode takes a lot of inspiration from it, and there's also touches of The Omen as well, with there being lots of death that could be explained away as being an accident, including Steve getting killed by his electric garage door. But Mulder brings a lot of mysterious priests to the house as well, and you of course immediately suspect that it's demons. Things then ramp up when Mulder's killed in a ritual, which appears to be by Charlie. However, upon being questioned, he starts to mention the name Michael. Now, where the twist comes in is that it's not your typical possession story. Maggie reveals that Charlie is a twin and that his brother was stillborn, a brother named Michael. She swears she never told Charlie about him, and we learn that her mother warned she'd have to separate their spirits. Maggie, being like a Western woman now, she didn't buy into it, but Michael has come back for revenge. So things ramp up, and after Michael pretends to be Charlie to be taken home by Maggie, the Mystics return to perform an exorcism. The scene is probably where the rating comes from, and yeah, it's very full on, with even Mulder struggling to do it. But eventually he finds his strength and pushes through, which banishes the spirit. However, one of the priests warns him that the devil knows him now. It never goes anywhere, and though it's a chilling way to end things, I do think it's a shame that they never really went anywhere with it. Now, when it came to the inspiration, Sarah Charno, the writer, took some of her studies from Eastern medicine and laced them throughout the show. Killing a kid was also a nightmare as well when it came to Fox's standards, and they just managed to squeeze that introduction through. However, they had to cut Steve's death down by quite a bit because it was thought to be too extreme when coupled with that. In the end, they actually preferred cutting around it though, and Carter thought it actually enhanced the impact. Unfortunately for me, the quality kind of dips with F. emasculata. In it, we watch a scientist discover a dead animal covered in boils. One bursts in his face, and it's not too long before he dies from the infection. This is the same location as the Puerto Rican jungle in Little Green Men, and them reusing a tropical locale. Not too long after, a prison inmate gets a severed animal leg sent to him, and after that, the virus spreads amongst the prison. During this, 2 inmates manage to escape, and having been infected, the agents must track them down before they create an epidemic. This is alongside Hank from Breaking Bad, aka Dean Norris. Always good seeing him, but I do think the episode kind of suffers from just kind of following the virus spread and the manhunt not really being that interesting. Scully gets locked in with a scientist who happens to be infected, and we see as the escapees infect their family while they return home to lay low. And everyone knows, mate, soon as you escape from prison, the first place you go is home. It's quickly suspected though that the government's created the infection parasite as part of bioweapons research. It's based off fears around biological warfare and how scared people were that a deadly virus could be engineered in a lab, which definitely wouldn't happen. The prisoner stuff also builds off the 1950 army tests, and we have the outbreak of Ebola that was emerging in the 90s. There's lots of popping, stuff bursting in people's faces, and a desperate race to stop things from spreading. They even carry out real-life contagion protocols such as burning bodies and hitting the thumbs up. Ultimately though, what drives the episode is the debate over whether to warn the public. Do they lock down? Do they give people a heads up? And yeah, watching the episode in 2026, it hits really well. Mulder wants people to know, and even goes to Skinner to confront him about the case. Here he sees the smoking man who wants to keep things hush-hush because this could cause a mass panic. And again, 2026, this is gonna remind you of some certain things and the debates that went on around the time. His inclusion was something they wrestled with though, as initially they just wanted to keep him in the mythology episodes. So this was his first Monster of the Week episode that kind of teased he had his hands in everything. Ultimately, they catch the prisoner on a bus with him being sniped and the virus being covered up. Mulder threatens to go public though, but ultimately he'd be seen as a wacko and no one would believe him. Overall, it's an okay episode, but probably I think one of the weaker ones in the season. Soft Light though is where the season goes on an upward swing, with it getting better every entry. Written by Vince Gilligan, we watch as a scientist who's imbued with dark matter makes people transcend into a black hole if they touch his shadow. All that's left is a pile of ash on the floor, which initially is thought to be human combustion. They even do a little throwback to Tooms as well, and I appreciated the series referencing itself.
You don't think anyone could have squeezed in there?
You never know.
That isn't the case though, and Tony Shalhoub's Dr. Banton ends up becoming a man who's afraid of his own shadow. Banton was researching particle accelerators with his partner Davey, and he'd been exposed to dark matter when he accidentally got locked in the machine. It's very Incredible Hulk, sort of Watchmen-y, and all that was found was his shadow burned into the wall, which is of course also a reference to Hiroshima. Gilligan came up with the idea after staring at his shadow and thinking it would be creepy if it moved on its own. Being a fan of the show, he learned his agent was related to Carter, and after pulling some strings he was able to meet him. It started off as just being a freelance gig, but by the time he finished this, he became a permanent writer. And to me, it was a great partnership too, as he wrote most of my favourite episodes. But things didn't play out in this entry exactly as Gilligan envisioned. The animation costs of having a shadow move on its own were going to rack up the budget, and thus they simply had it so you couldn't step into Banton's shadow. But where Gilligan's writing soar is in how much Banton cracks as he begins to accidentally take people out. Eventually, Mulder realises he has to be kept in the dark, or in rooms lit so bright they don't really cast a shadow. Dana also has a student who's on her first case who I did think would become a recurring character, but nope, gets wiped out by the shadow. Where I think this stuff goes to the next level though is what it does with X. Banton claims the government wants to utilise him for his powers, and Mulder asks X and Banton's partner exactly what's going on. Both deny it, say we don't care about the guy at all, but we see as X goes to remove Banton from the hospital. He cuts the power, but the emergency lights turn on and the Doc's shadow takes out his two escorts. So Banton goes back to his partner Davey and he escorts him into the machine. Finally, the pair will destroy Banton and their work and make sure that it can't fall into the wrong hands. It's only upon locking the door though that Davey reveals, yeah mate, I've actually been working for the government the whole time. All of a sudden though, Davey is shot with X peeping through the peephole.
You can back up a little bit.
Perfectly mirrors the opening of the episode where Banton went to an ally at a hotel and he looked through his hotel door before being hit by the shadow. And yeah, I just love how cyclical Gilligan's writing often is. The agents then come across the footage of the night and it seems like Banton was vaporized by the accelerator. But Mulder wonders if that was actually him, and after realizing X was at the hospital, he tells him to never contact him again. X denies everything. He says X is gonna give it to you, and he says he's only helping Mulder out of loyalty to Deep Throat, and that he's got his hands bloody fighting his battles already. But ultimately, they leave things on frosty grounds, and X has indeed been keeping things close to his chest. We end with X visiting Banton at a facility who's having light experiments conducted on him as he sits in a chair. We zoom in on the character as he cries, forever locked in this state of light and darkness. What I love about this episode is that the villains and heroes kind of flip positions, with X being revealed as being bad, while Banton is in fact trying to do the right thing. It's great seeing Shalhoub in the role too, and he really embodies the guy who's cracking under what he's going through. Tony hadn't actually heard of the show at the time of casting and was currently on the NBC series Wings, but upon telling people he was in the show, they were shocked and said they couldn't wait. He loved the Twilight Zone feel of the episode as well, and overall it's a pretty solid entry. The following is probably one of my top 4 in the series as well, and that is Our Town. Now we begin with the Doctor and a much younger woman driving out of the woods for a wee bit of smashing it like the like button. He's knocking back pills and looks like he's holding something in. Seems like he might be a killer, and the read is he's potentially about to do something bad, but she's pretty playful and leads him into the woods where he's smashed with an axe by a guy wearing a tribal mask. 10 months later, the agents go to where the Doctor's case has gone cold, and there's apparently been foxfire spotted in the area. This is a fungi that created bioluminescent glowing, and it's often been attributed to aliens. So that's what draws Mulder in, but he finds something much, much worse.
A child.
No.
They investigate the local chicken plant, which is pretty much the staple of the community. Named Checo's Chicken, it's a foundation of the town that's created jobs and a real sense of community. However, we learn that the Doctor had reported numerous health violations, and things ramp up during the tour. Paula, aka the girl who's with the Doc at the start, grabs the manager Jess Harold and holds him at knife point. She's shot and killed by the local sheriff, with her body then slumping into the chicken feed. Now it turns out that she's been going crazy the last couple of months and is exhibiting the same symptoms the Doctor showed as well. So they go to see her grandfather Walter, who's the owner of the chicken plant. He gives them permission to form an autopsy, and they're baffled when they learn Paula's actually 47 years old. Turns out that she and the Doc suffered from that Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which have butchered again, but it's an extremely rare disease that causes early onset dementia. The odds of this being connected to the two people in the same small town is like winning the lottery, and yet they come across someone else with it as well. Out on the road, a chicken truck swerves into the river, and it turns out the driver's got it as well. The agents then realize that this is also where the runoffs of the plant lead to. Mulder orders the river dragged, and in it they find a ton of human bones, including ones that belong to the doctor. Now, what the hell is going on? Well, I think the creators clearly became fascinated by the mad cow disease that we touched upon earlier. As mentioned earlier, cows consuming cows cause several mental problems. We even learn in the episode that the unwanted parts of the chicken are ground into seeds, which are then fed to the chickens themselves. Paula's death even alludes towards this as she falls into the feed upon getting shot. That feels a lot like the river, and it nicely mirrors how people are eating themselves, which is the twist of the episode. Yes, it turns out the town is 100% cannibal, and they'd been consuming outsiders in order to stay young.
Finn, you're delicious!
We learn that Walter was actually shot down during the war and that he landed in New Guinea. There he spent time with the jail tribe and learned of their cannibalistic ways. Walter returned home and told the town, and since then they've built a community around eating outsiders. Now, it not only ties into mad cow disease, but beyond that it echoes a lot of conspiracies around processed food products. There's also studies into cannibalism that shows humans who did it get infected with diseases and onset early dementia, and great movie careers as well. So that's what's been going throughout the town, with everyone getting more and more affected. Now, as for bad as that seems, mate, Walter actually comes across as a pretty nice guy. He says that they need to keep their rituals secret and that they'll cover everyone's back and only ever target outsiders. The doctor's wife, who is in on it, she even comes to the house and is like, oh, I'm worried, mate. All the FBI's closing in. But they're banging on me door, mate. I don't know what I'm going to do. And you think Walter's going to be like, right, whacker, as soon as he closes the door, but he's like, mate, she's fine. If we start turning on each other, then we'll end up imploding. However, Harold is kind of wanting to stage a coup, and he kills the doc's wife, which goes against the rules. Scully then goes to her house, and Harold captures her and takes her for a ritual. Now, while this is going on, Mulder travels to Walter's, and he opens up a strange ornate cupboard. Here he finds several shrunken heads, including the doctor's, but Walter is nowhere to be seen. Where Walter's going to is to the ritual to confront Harold, and he basically berates the whole group for how they've lost their ways. He says once you're eating each other, everyone will be turning on everyone, and ultimately it falls on deaf ears. Harold orders Walter to be killed, and they then put Scully on the chopping block. It's very intense, and we see she's buckled in with an executioner standing with a bloody axe. And hey, obviously, I know Mulder's gonna arrive and save the day, but in the moment I was like, oh shit, Scully might be dead. No season 3. But yeah, Mulder shows up and starts shooting while the town spreads out. What's worrying in the end, though, is that they obviously don't know who is part of the group and can't just round up the whole town. Walter's remains were never found either, and it's thought the chickens at the plant are being fed his remains. The chickens are then shipped out all over the country, and we could be looking at another big deadly food spread. And yeah, as someone who lived through BSE, foot and mouth, and also the horse meat scandal, I really like this episode, and not just cause I'm a veggie mate. And I'm getting a bit sick of you mentioning it, actually. It seems to be all you bloody talk about. But it's a great episode, and I love these ones where it turns out the whole town's in on it. That takes us to the season finale, which is also another banger. Now, it's of course a UFO one, but hey, at this point, I really like them. We begin with a Navajo kid discovering something metallic under the desert floor, and he then takes an alien body from it back to his home. Cutting to Washington, the lone gunman then tell Mulder that their ally, the Thinker, has managed to crack the Defense Department's database. Basically found all the files on UFOs and has them in his possession. Now, the Thinker, unfortunately, wasn't much of a thinker, and he didn't whack on like a VPN or anything before entering.
I know it was too much of a thinker!
Guy never actually expected it to work, but it did, and he's pretty screwed. So he goes to Mulder with the files, which are all in Navajo. This is actually based on real life, and during World War II, several documents were sent back and forth encrypted. Navajo was actually the only code that the Germans couldn't crack, and since then, a lot of things have been encrypted in the language. And this was like before Google Translate, mate. But Mulder's getting pretty frustrated as he can't read it either, and he actually ends up punching Skinner in the hallway when he asks him to go into his office. Bloody hell, mate, bit much that. A panel's then held with Scully being brought in order to talk about his behaviour and his potential dismissal, and hers as well if she doesn't tell the truth. It's here where the twists come thick and fast, and the cigarette smoking man goes to visit Fox's father Bill. Turns out that the pair actually used to work together, and that Bill had a hand in a lot of the decisions in the government. Though we don't learn exactly what this entailed, it's clear his daughter's disappearance isn't a coincidence. Smoking Man then asks him for the documents, but he plays dumb and says he'll talk to his son. That night when Mulder drops in, his dad's about to reveal the truth, but he's killed by an assassin as he goes to the bathroom. Mulder flees to Scully, denying that he killed his dad, but it's clear his behaviour is becoming erratic. So Scully doesn't want to take any chances, and she steals his gun and takes it to ballistics for testing. It clears Mulder, but obviously, he's not happy with the woman he trusted running forensic tests on him instead of taking his word. So he bails and actually spots Krychek, who he holds up at gunpoint. Turns out Krychek was the assassin who killed his dad, and Mulder's about to shoot him in cold blood when Scully arrives and caps Fox in the shoulder. Krychek then gets away, but she takes Mulder to New Mexico, where he starts to recover. Turns out Mulder's water has actually been drugged with LSD, and this is why he's been going further and further off the deep end. The deep throat end, you could say. The Syndicate may have even wanted Mulder to shoot Krychek, as it would have been easier to pin his father's death on him, as he's clearly been getting more and more irrational. But he's all good, and we learn Scully's taken the cipher to a Navajoan elder who's helped her crack the documents. This includes the info on her and Dwayne Barry, and you might have guessed the elder's grandson was the one who found the container at the start. He's going to take Mulder there, but Fox gets a call from Smoking Man. He denies having his dad killed and is just like, oh mate, just join the membership, it's just 99 cents a month. Yeah, but you get, sure, it's expensive, but you get loads of access to breakdowns like this early. You're my mate, Mulder, let's be friends. Mulder's like, fuck off, man, and hangs up, but it's too late. This was all a trick by the Smoking Man to trace the call, and as Mulder heads to the metal container, the helicopters close in. Inside, Mulder finds a pile of dead aliens who all have smallpox vaccination scars in their arm, indicating there's something else afoot here. They then torch the transport and destroy the site, with Mulder seemingly dead in the blaze. And it's a big cliffhanger to end on. Season 2 completely knocked it out the park, and it found the perfect balance between the Monster of the Week stuff and the overall greater conspiracy. There was lots of real life connections too, and overall, I think this is where we really start the golden era. Though the truth is still out there, this is still an excellent season, and I've had so much fun going through it. Hope you guys have enjoyed it as well, and I'd of course love to hear all your thoughts below. Please drop a like on the video too, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the episode and the video too. If you want to follow us on Instagram as well, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Again, members of the channel get early access to videos like this every single week, and it's just 99 cents a month. We also have our merch store there too, with the shirts behind me. We've got big discounts on at the moment, and the more you buy, the more money you save. If not though, thank you for watching this video. We have a breakdown of season 1 on screen right now. You might not have seen it. If you have, yeah, go watch it again. If you haven't seen it, go watch it now. If not though, you've been the best, mate, and I've been Paul. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Peace.